Hi, I'm Khalib, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Wild West Tales of Law. Let's begin the story.
They laughed when the auctioneer shoved her into the ring behind the horses. Silas Kane had heard ugly laughter before. He had heard it in saloons, at card tables, at gravesides, where men drank too much and forgot how to act human. But this was different. This was the kind of laughter that came when people believed they could do anything and no one would stop them. The woman stumbled once in the dust, her wrists tied with a frayed rope, then caught herself and stood still. Bare feet, torn dress, hair hanging over her face. She looked thin enough for the wind to carry away. The auctioneer slapped the rail and grinned like this was a joke for everyone's pleasure. "2 bay horses," he shouted. "And I'll throw in the girl for free." More laughter rolled through the yard. Silas did not laugh. He stood at the back rail with his hat low, one hand in his pocket wrapped around the last of his money. The ranch was hurting. 2 good horses had gone lame in 1 week, and a man could not move cattle on hope. He had come for stock, not trouble. He had repeated that to himself all morning. Then he saw the woman lift her head for 1 second. Her face was dirty, but her eyes were not empty. They were sharp, watching, measuring every man in that yard like she already knew which ones were dangerous. Silas knew that look. The bidding started low. The horses were rough, ribs showing, coats dull, but their legs were straight, and their eyes were clear, usable. Silas waited while other men tossed out numbers and dropped away. Grain prices were bad. Water was low. Nobody wanted to spend more than they had to. 15, Silas said. The auctioneer pointed at him. 15 from Kane. Any more? Silence. The gavel hit. Sold. Silas let out a slow breath. He had his horses. That should have been the end of it. Instead, the auctioneer jerked his thumb toward the woman. "Take your prize too, Kane. She comes with the lot." The yard exploded again with laughter. Silas felt his jaw lock. "I bought horses." "And you got horses," the auctioneer said. "The girl costs you nothing." A big man near the front stepped up, grinning through yellow teeth. Virgil Creed. Silas knew him by name and by rumor. Both bad. Creed looked at the woman the way wolves looked at a limping calf. "If Kane don't want her," Creed said, "I'll take her." The woman's fingers curled into fists. It was the smallest movement in the world, but Silas saw it. Not fear. Anger. Hard and controlled. Something old and bitter moved in his chest. A memory of his mother standing alone in a bank office, while men talked over her head like she was furniture. A memory of saying nothing, because he had been young and poor and scared. He looked at the auctioneer. "Untie her." The laughter died so fast the whole yard sounded empty. Creed's grin dropped. "Now hold on." Silas did not look at him. "I said untie her." The auctioneer hesitated, then waved over a boy with a knife. The rope was cut. The woman swayed once, grabbed the mane of one horse and steadied herself. She still did not speak. Creed spat in the dirt. "You just bought yourself a problem, Kane." Silas took the reins and turned toward the gate. Maybe. He did not tell the woman to follow. He did not need to. A moment later, he heard her bare feet in the dust behind him. They walked in silence for nearly a mile before Silas stopped on the road out of town. The auction noise was gone. The prairie wind moved through dry grass on both sides of them. He turned and looked at her properly. She stood a few steps back, shoulders straight despite the bruises on her arms. Dirt covered her skin, but she carried herself like someone raised around books and tables, not wagons and camps. She was exhausted, but not broken. "You don't have to come with me," Silas said. "I am not your owner." She said nothing. "My ranch is east of here. You can eat, rest, and leave in the morning." "Fair enough." For the first time, she raised her eyes to his and held them. Then she gave one small nod. They reached the ranch near sunset. It was not much to look at. A leaning barn. A crooked corral. A weathered house with patched shingles and a porch that needed work. The kind of place built by stubborn hands and held together by repairs. Silas watered the horses and pointed toward the bunkhouse. "There's a cot inside. Barrel by the door has water. I'll bring food." She went inside without a word and closed the door behind her. Silas stood in the yard with the reins in his hand, wondering what kind of fool brought a stranger home from an auction yard where men sold women as jokes. Then he went inside, made a plate of beans, bread, and dried beef, and set it on the bunkhouse step. He did not sleep much that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the rope around her wrists and Creed's smile. He also saw those eyes, clear and watchful. Not the eyes of someone who had given up. Before dawn, he stepped outside and stopped cold. The bunkhouse door was open. For one hard second, he thought she was gone. Then he heard hammering. He followed the sound to the corral and found her crouched by the fence, barefoot in the dirt, driving nails into a loose rail with short, steady strikes. His hammer, his nails, his broken fence, the one he had been meaning to fix for months. She finished one board, tested it with both hands, then moved to the next. Silas stared. "You don't have to do that." Quote. She paused, set the hammer down, and finally spoke. "The lower hinge on your barn door is rusted through. It will snap in a week." Her voice was calm and educated, the kind that did not belong in an auction ring. Silas blinked. "You can talk." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and there was something almost dry in her expression. "Yes. They said you couldn't." They said many things. She picked up the hammer again. Most of them were useful. Silas walked closer, slow and careful. "What's your name?" She drove one more nail before answering. "Ruth," she said. "Ruth Calloway." Silas nodded once. "Silas Kane." She glanced toward the house, then across the pasture, taking in the fences, the barn, the dry grass, the tired horses he had brought home. Her eyes moved like she was reading a page. "This ranch is in trouble," she said. Silas almost laughed. "You figured that out in one morning." "I figured it out on the road." She stood, dusted off her hands, and faced him. "And if you let me, I can help you save it." Quote, Silas studied her bruised wrists, her bare feet, the dirt on her face, and the strange, steady strength in the way she stood. He did not know where she came from. He did not know what she was running from. He only knew one thing for sure. The men in that auction yard had been wrong about her. And something told him the cost of saying untie her had only just begun. Silas should have sent her away that same day. That was the sensible thing. Feed her, give her boots, point her toward town, and keep his own life small and quiet. He had spent years surviving by doing exactly that. Small choices, quiet choices, no risks he could not pay for. Instead, by noon, Ruth Calloway was sitting at his kitchen table with his ranch ledgers spread open in front of her, and Silas was learning just how dangerous a smart woman could be. She had washed at the pump and tied her hair back with a strip of cloth. Mrs. Kane's old work boots were too big for her, but she wore them anyway. The bruises on her wrists were still dark, but her hands were steady as she turned page after page of his records. "Who taught you bookkeeping?" Silas asked. "My mother," Ruth said, not looking up. "Then lawyers, then thieves." Silas leaned on the table, arms crossed. "That last one sounds useful." It was. She tapped a line in his ledger with one finger. "You pay a rail crossing fee every quarter. Mercer Rail owns the cut south of my place." Ruth looked at him. "Do they?" Quote. Silas frowned. "That's what the notice said." "That is not what I asked." She stood, carried the ledger to the shelf where he kept rolled maps, and picked through them until she found an old survey copy his father had filed years ago. She spread it flat, holding the corners with a coffee cup and salt jar. "Here," she said, "this boundary line, public access strip." Silas stepped closer. The map was faded, but his father's notes were still clear in the margins. "That's old." "Old is often better," Ruth said. "Older records are harder to alter because too many copies exist." She traced the line with a cracked fingernail. "If this is the original survey," then Mercer moved the marker on paper, "you have been paying to cross land that was never theirs." Silas stared at the map, then at the ledger. "How much?" Ruth flipped pages, doing the numbers in her head so fast it made his neck tighten. over 8 years, with increases. A little over $400. The room went quiet. $400 was not a number. It was feed through winter. It was a new roof. It was medicine when his mother got sick and pretended she was not. It was the difference between losing cattle and saving them. Silas looked out the window at the barn and felt heat rise in his chest. Son of a... There's more, Ruth said. She turned another page. Water rights filing. 2 years ago, Mercer petitioned for diversion access from the East Creek. Silas grabbed the ledger. That creek waters my lower pasture. And if no one challenges the claim, it becomes theirs on paper. Then they charge you for access to your own water. He looked at her, disbelief turning slowly into something colder. You know all this from one morning with my books. I know this because I have seen it before. Ruth's voice changed then, less dry, more personal. Again and again. Silas set the ledger down carefully. Who are you, Ruth? She did not answer right away. Instead, she walked to the sink, poured herself a little water, and stood with both hands braced on the counter. For the first time since he brought her home, she looked tired all the way through. When she turned back, her face was set. My father is Harlan Mercer. The name hit him like a fence post to the ribs. Silas did not move, did not speak. He just looked at her and let the words settle. Mercer. The same Mercer name stamped on foreclosure notices. The same Mercer company that took his father's south pasture. The same Mercer men who sat in town offices and smiled while families lost everything. Ruth watched his face and nodded once, like she had expected exactly this. Yes, she said quietly, that Mercer. Silas took a step back from the table. And you were in that auction ring. Why? Because I found things I was not supposed to find. She sat down again, but she did not touch the ledgers now. She folded her hands in her lap, and he noticed for the first time how raw her knuckles were, like old scabs had broken and healed over and over. My father keeps copies of everything, she said. Payments, survey changes, letters to judges, orders to men who do ugly work and call it business. He trusted me in the house, because daughters are decoration to men like him. He thought I listened to piano and read novels. Her mouth tightened. I listened. I read his files. Silas felt the room shrink around them. You stole proof. I copied what I could, memorized what I could not carry. Parcel numbers, dates, bribe amounts, names of men paid to move markers, poison wells, burn barns. At that, Silas's eyes snapped to hers. Poison wells! Not wells, feed and water upstream. Whatever ruined a ranch cleanest. He thought of his father standing over dead cattle at the south pasture fence. 40 had gone in a week. Thought of the doctor saying bad water and shrugging like God had done it. Thought of his mother working until her hands curled and stiffened. Ruth saw something in his face. What was it? She asked softly. Silas swallowed. Winter, before the foreclosure, cattle died fast. We lost near everything. Ruth closed her eyes for a second. I am sorry. Did your father order it? I do not know your case for certain, she said, and her voice was careful now, but I know he has done it before. More than once. Quote. Silas turned away and put both hands on the table. He stared at the wood grain until it blurred. He wanted to throw something, wanted to shout, wanted to ride straight to Mercer's office and put a fist through a polished window. Instead, he stood still, because stillness was all he had. Behind him, Ruth spoke again. He found out I knew. He did not kill me because that invites questions. He had me taken west with a cattle crew, passed around camp to camp, traded for labor, for supplies, for silence. By the time I reached that auction yard, they had a story ready, mute, useless, worthless. Silas turned back slowly. How long? 7 months. The number sat between them like a stone. Silas looked at the bruises on her wrists again and understood them differently now. Not one bad day. Many. Not bad luck. Deliberate. You let them think you could not speak, he said. Ruth gave a faint, bitter nod. A woman men think is broken gets ignored. Men talk freely around, ignored women. Silas let out a breath through his nose. That is how you survived. That is how I learned more. Quote. Silence stretched in the kitchen. The only sound was the wind against the back wall and a loose shutter tapping outside. Finally, Ruth met his eyes. You need to decide now, she said. If I stay here, your life gets harder. Men will come looking for me. They may already be looking. If you tell me to leave, I leave before dark, and I do not bring that danger to your door. Silas looked around his kitchen, his mother's chipped blue bowl on the shelf, his father's old survey pinned near the stove, ledgers stacked in neat piles because his mother had believed order mattered even when nothing else did. The ranch was already in trouble. The danger was not coming. It had been here for years, wearing a better coat and calling itself law. He looked back at Ruth. You fixed my fence before breakfast, he said. Ruth blinked. What? You spotted my barn hinge from 30 feet. You found $400 in theft on one page. And you know the names of men who robbed half this territory. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. Lady, I am not sending you anywhere. Quote. For the first time, Ruth's composure cracked. Not in a dramatic way, just one small break around the eyes, like she had been bracing for a blow and did not know what to do when it did not come. They will come, she said quietly. Then let them. Silas slid the ledgers toward her. If there is a way to stop Mercer from taking the rest of my land, I want it. If there is a way to prove what he did to my family, I want that too. Ruth studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Then we start with evidence, she said. By late afternoon, every paper Silas owned was spread across the kitchen table. Ruth worked like a woman with a fire at her heels. She sorted receipts, tax notices, rail fees, bank letters, and old survey copies into piles. She asked sharp questions and expected exact answers. When did your father first miss payments? After the cattle died. Month. January, maybe. Maybe gets men robbed. Month. Silas rubbed his neck. January 1875. She found the bank notice and set it on top. Good. Foreclosure filing. March. She found that too. Her finger stopped on the signature line and her face went flat. Gerald Haynes. You know him. My father's attorney. Silas sat back in his chair. You are telling me the same man on my foreclosure papers worked for Mercer. I am telling you your father did not lose this ranch because he was unlucky. The room felt too small to hold that truth. The sun was low when Ruth leaned back and pressed her fingers to her temples. We need official records, she said. Territorial Survey Office, original plats, land transfer filings, water petitions. The real copies, not the ones in county drawers. Where? Helena. Silas gave a short laugh with no humor in it. That is a long ride. 4 days by main road, 5 if we avoid Mercer checkpoints. Silas looked up sharply. Checkpoints. Ruth held his gaze. You think my father steals land with paperwork alone? He did not answer. Before she could speak again, hoofbeats came up the road. Both of them froze. Silas moved to the window and lifted the curtain edge. Hold, he said. Holt Dawson rode into the yard at an easy pace, but he was looking at the bunkhouse, the barn, the corral, taking stock. Silas stepped outside before Holt could dismount. Evening, Holt said, too casual. Heard you bought 2 horses. I did. Holt's eyes flicked past him toward the house. Heard you brought something else home, too. Silas kept his face blank. Town talks too much. It sure does. Holt slid off his horse and lowered his voice. Virgil Creed has been running his mouth at the saloon. Says you stole property. Silas's jaw tightened. She is not property. Holt held up both hands. I know that. I came to warn you, not start a fight. Ruth stepped onto the porch behind Silas. Holt looked at her and his expression changed. He saw the bruises, saw the way she stood. Whatever gossip he had heard, some of it died on his face right there. Ma'am, Holt said, tipping his hat. Ruth gave a small nod. What kind of warning? Holt hesitated, then said it plain. Creed sent a wire from the telegraph office last night. Clerk said it was about a woman from the auction and that she might be worth money to the right people. Ruth went very still. Silas felt it before he saw it, the air in the yard tightening like a rope pulled hard. "How long ago?" she asked. "Before midnight." She looked at Silas. "Then they know where I was sold. If they know that, they can trace who bought the horses." Holt shifted, uneasy now. "I figured as much. Thought you should know before men started showing up polite." Silas nodded once. "You did right." Holt looked between them. "I do not need your business, but if trouble is coming, and it sounds like trouble is already saddled, you had better move before it gets here." When Holt rode off, the sky had gone orange and purple over the west pasture. Silas and Ruth stood in the yard without speaking. Finally, Ruth said, "We leave at first light." Silas looked toward the barn, then the house, then the road to town. "No," he said, "we leave tonight." Ruth turned to him. "The horses are tired." "So are we. Night riding through cut country is risky." Quote, "So is waiting for Mercer's men to knock on my door." For a second she looked like she might argue. Then she nodded once. "All right," she said. "Fast and light. Food, water, your ledgers, survey copies, and any deed papers you have. No extra weight." Silas was already moving toward the house. Within an hour, the ranch was dark behind them. Silas rode one of the new bays. Ruth rode the other, her posture straight, reins steady, his mother's boots too big in the stirrups. He led the pack mule with supplies and the wrapped bundle of ledgers tied tight behind the saddle. They kept off the main road and followed a dry creek bed east, the moon thin and low. Crickets sang in the brush. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. "You know the route," Silas said quietly. "I know where Mercer's men post up on the main crossings," Ruth said. "I learned while being moved between camps." He glanced at her in the dark. "You keep saying things like that as if they are ordinary." "They are ordinary to me now." That answer stayed with him. Near midnight, they stopped in a stand of cottonwoods to water the horses. No fire. No talking louder than needed. Ruth checked the saddle straps and repacked the papers to keep them dry if they had to ford water. Silas watched her work and shook his head. "You were not lying about helping save a ranch." Ruth looked up. "I was raised in parlors, Silas. I learned survival elsewhere." He almost smiled. "Fair enough." They had just settled the horses when Ruth's head snapped toward the ridge. Silas listened and heard nothing. "What?" "Hooves," she whispered. On shale, more than one rider. He held his breath. Then he heard it too. Faint, rhythmic, steady. How many? 3, maybe 4. How far? Close enough if they know where to look. Silas grabbed the reins and swung into the saddle. "Can they track us in the dark?" Ruth was already mounted. "Not well, unless they have someone who knows the land." "Then we move." They rode without a trail, cutting through brush and shallow washouts, letting the horses pick their footing. Ruth guided them by ridgeline and creek scent like she had a map in her head. Twice she changed direction for no reason he could see. Twice. Minutes later, he heard riders where they would have been if they had stayed straight. Just before dawn, they dropped into a narrow river bend and rode in the water for a quarter-mile to break their trail. When they came out on the far bank, Silas was wet to the knee and breathing hard, but the sound behind them had faded. Ruth looked back once, then forward again. "That bought us time," she said. "How much?" "Not enough." The first pale light of morning spread across the hills ahead, and in that gray-blue dawn, Silas could see what waited in front of them. Mountains. The Bitterroot Pass. Long ride. Hard country. No easy ground. Ruth adjusted her grip on the reins and looked at him, all calm edges and tired eyes and stubborn will. "If we make the pass by tomorrow night," she said, "we can reach Helena before Mercer's men close the roads." Silas nodded and turned his horse uphill. Behind them was a ranch already half stolen. Ahead of them was a judge, a records office, and men with money who would kill to keep paper buried. For the first time in years, Silas did not feel like a man trying to hold on to what was left. He felt like a man riding toward the fight. By the time they reached the Bitterroot Pass, both horses were lathered and trembling. Silas slid from the saddle and checked the bay's legs with tired hands. The horse was still sound, but barely. Ruth was already at the edge of the trail, studying the slope below like she could read danger in the rocks. "We stopped for 1 hour," Silas said. "We stopped for 30 minutes, Ruth replied. He looked at her, dust on her face, hair loose from the cloth tie, bruises fading yellow at her wrists, eyes sharp as ever. "You sleep at all last night?" "Did you?" Silas snorted. "Fair point." They watered the horses at a spring and ate in silence. Hard bread, dried meat, cold coffee from a tin flask. Ruth sat with the ledgers in her lap even while she ate, checking the bundle ties for the 3rd time. Silas watched her for a moment. "You hold those papers like they breathe." "They do," she said quietly. "They are the first proof some people will ever get that they were not crazy." That sat heavy in his chest. When they rode again, the trail narrowed and turned mean. Loose stone, steep drop on one side, trees crowding the other. They moved slower now, no choice. By midday they heard the first gunshot behind them. One sharp crack that rolled through the pass. Silas reined in. "Signal." Ruth looked back down the trail. "They found our track." "How far?" "Too far to hit us, close enough to push us." Silas checked the rifle in his scabbard. "If they close the gap—" Ruth's voice turned hard. "No shooting unless they draw first. If we kill a man with a badge or a hired rider near Helena, my father will turn this into a story about criminals." Silas looked at her. "You think like a lawyer. I think like prey." He hated that answer because it was true. They pushed the horses down the north slope and came out near dusk onto a rough old logging road Ruth recognized from memory, and an old map she had seen in Mercer's office years earlier. It cut time, but only if a person rode hard and trusted rotten bridges. Silas trusted neither, but he trusted Ruth. The second gunshot came closer. Then another. No signal now. Pressure. They crossed one narrow bridge at a walk, boards groaning under the horses. The bay under Ruth stumbled and nearly went to one knee. She leaned low, spoke to it steady, and brought it through. "You all right?" Silas called. "I am." "He is tired." "We all are. Keep riding." By late afternoon on the second day, the trees broke and Helena appeared in the distance, low roofs and church steeple under a pale sky. Silas felt a burst of relief so sharp it almost made him laugh. Then Ruth grabbed his arm. "Silas." 3 riders sat on the south road between them and town, spaced wide, blocking the easiest approach. The man in the center wore a marshal's badge that flashed in the sun, Wade Pruitt. Even at this distance, Ruth recognized him. Her face went white in a way Silas had not seen before. "That's him," she said, "my father's marshal." Silas looked behind them. Dust on the ridge, more riders coming. A trap. "How many in back?" 3, maybe 4. He did the math and came up with the same answer she already knew. No room left. Pruitt raised a hand and called out, voice carrying across the open ground. "Silas Kane!" "Halt!" and hand over the woman. Silas leaned toward Ruth without taking his eyes off the men ahead. "When I say go, you ride past them and don't look back." "Silas, do not argue. He wants you to stand here and play brave. He wants you alive and quiet. Means he won't shoot first in open daylight this close to town." Ruth's jaw tightened. "You are betting your life on that." He gave a dry smile. "Been betting it on worse." Pruitt called again. "You are aiding a fugitive. Last warning." Silas rode forward at a slow trot, putting himself between Pruitt and Ruth. "Got a warrant," Silas shouted back. Pruitt's mouth curled. "Federal authority is enough." "Not the question." The marshal's eyes narrowed. Behind Silas, Ruth shifted her horse, waiting. Silas kept talking, forcing Pruitt's focus onto him. "Funny thing about men who say authority real loud. Usually means they forgot the paper." One of Pruitt's riders started to move around the line. Silas shouted without turning, "Now!" Ruth kicked the bay hard. The horse surged forward, cutting wide toward the gap on the right. Pruitt cursed and pointed. One rider lunged to intercept. Silas spurred straight at him and drove his shoulder into the man's horse, breaking the line for one heartbeat. One heartbeat was enough. Ruth shot through the gap and rode for town like the devil himself was behind her. Pruitt wheeled, drawing his pistol. But Silas pushed his own horse between the gun and Ruth's back. "Shoot then," Silas said, "in front of half the county." Pruitt's eyes went flat with rage. He lowered the pistol and slammed the steel barrel across Silas's face. Pain exploded white. Silas nearly came off the saddle. Blood filled his mouth. "Where is she going?" Pruitt snapped. Silas spat red in the dirt and grinned through it. "Somewhere you can't follow." Pruitt hit him again, lower this time, across the ribs. Silas folded over the horn, gasping, but he did not answer. Pruitt stared at him one long second, then jerked his head at his men. "Leave him. Ride." Quote, the marshal and his riders thundered toward Helena after Ruth. Silas sat in the road bleeding and half-blind, listening to the hoofbeats fade. He forced air into his lungs, wiped blood from his eye, and turned his horse toward town. Every step hurt. He rode anyway. Ruth reached Helena at a dead run. People shouted and jumped clear as she tore down Main Street on a spent horse, scanning signs through sweat and dust. Bank, hotel, mercantile, drugstore. Then she saw the brass plate by a two-story office at the far end of the street. Judge Samuel Creighton, Federal Court. She pulled the horse up so hard it slid, foam flying from its mouth. Ruth hit the ground running and pounded on the locked door. "Judge Creighton, open this door." No answer. Behind her shouts, Pruitt's riders entering town. She pounded again with both fists. "My name is Ruth Mercer. I have evidence against Harlan Mercer. If you do not open this door now, I will be dead before sunset." The lock turned. A white-haired man in shirt sleeves opened the door a crack, took one look at her, then looked past her shoulder to the marshal riding hard up the street. He opened the door wide. Inside, Ruth stumbled through. The judge bolted the door just as Pruitt hit the steps. "Open up," Pruitt shouted. Federal business. Judge Creighton did not move from the door. He looked at Ruth, filthy, shaking, barefoot in borrowed boots too large for her, and saw something in her face that made him decide quickly. "Start talking," he said. Ruth talked. She did not stop for water, did not stop for breath longer than needed. Names, dates, bribes, false surveys, burned barns, poisoned stock, altered records, shell companies, judges paid, sheriffs bought. The judge wrote fast, then faster. Outside, Pruitt pounded and threatened and used the word authority until it lost all meaning. Inside, Ruth gave the judge enough truth to split a territory open. By the time she finished, dusk light was slanting through the office windows, and the judge's hand was cramped and stained with ink. He set down his pen and looked at her for a long moment. "If this is false, Miss Mercer, it will ruin you." "It is true," Ruth said, "and if you wait, it will ruin everyone else first." He nodded once. Within the hour, Judge Creighton issued an emergency protection order in her name, sealed statements into the federal record, and sent copies by wire and post beyond Mercer's reach. When Pruitt demanded entry again, the judge opened the door and met him on the steps. "You have no warrant," Creighton said. "You have no prisoner. You have no authority in this building." Pruitt's calm slipped for the first time. "You are making a mistake, Judge." Creighton held up the signed order. "No, I am finally correcting one." Pruitt looked past him at Ruth standing in the doorway. "Your father will not forgive this," he said. Ruth met his stare. "This is not for forgiveness." He rode away, but not far. Men like Pruitt did not leave. They waited. An hour later, the sheriff's deputy brought Silas in half, hanging over his saddle, face split and ribs bruised black. Ruth was on the courthouse steps before the horse stopped moving. She reached up, helped ease him down, and her hands were shaking so hard she had to grip his arm twice. "You're hurt." Silas tried to smile and winced. "You made it. You idiot. You're welcome." The laugh that came out of her sounded too close to crying. The doctor cleaned him up and wrapped his ribs. Judge Creighton filed more statements before midnight. Ruth gave everything she could remember. Silas gave names, dates, and the history of his father's foreclosure. By dawn, Mercer's empire was no longer rumor. It was a case. The hearing was set for Tuesday. By Tuesday morning, the courtroom was packed. Ranchers, store owners, widows, teamsters. Men who hated Mercer, and men who feared him, and men who once worked for him and wanted to know which way the wind was turning. Ruth sat at the witness table in a plain borrowed dress from Mrs. Fenton at the boarding house. Her hands were folded. Her back was straight. Silas sat in the front row with one cheek still swollen and his hat in his lap. Judge Creighton called the room to order. Ruth stood. "My father has stolen 63 parcels of land in this territory in 19 years, she said, her voice clear as glass. "I can name every one." The courtroom broke into noise. The gavel pounded. Ruth waited and went on. For 2 hours she spoke from memory, parcel numbers, survey dates, payment trails. Names of men paid to alter markers and file false claims. She named lawyers, clerks, judges, deputies. She named shell companies and showed how they led back to Mercer Land and Rail. Then she named Silas Kane. The Kane South Pasture foreclosure followed the loss of 40 head of cattle after contamination upstream, she said. The foreclosure papers were filed by Gerald Haynes, attorney to Harlan Mercer. Silas felt the room tilt. He had heard the truth in a kitchen. Hearing it in court was different. In public, on the record, real enough to hurt. A rancher in the back stood up, shouting that the same thing happened to him. Then another. Judge Creighton nearly broke his gavel, getting them quiet. When Ruth finished, no one in the room looked at her the way men had looked at her in the auction yard. No one laughed. They looked like people watching a storm roll in and realizing it was aimed at the right house for once. By recess, telegraph lines were already humming east. By evening, Mercer's investors sent a lawyer. He arrived at Silas's ranch the next day in a suit too fine for the road and boots too clean for a man claiming urgency. Silas, Ruth, Holt Dawson, and half a dozen neighbors were in the yard salvaging lumber from the burned barn when he rode in under a white cloth tied to a stick. He introduced himself as Charles Whitford from St. Louis. Ruth did not invite him to sit. He cleared his throat and smiled the smile of a man used to buying his way out of trouble. "My clients are prepared to offer full land restitution and compensation to affected families," he said. "In return, they ask only that Mr. Mercer avoid criminal prosecution." Silence fell across the yard. Holt stopped with a beam on his shoulder. Eleanor Bryce, who had ridden out after the hearing with a rifle and a face like carved oak, spat in the dirt. Ruth stepped forward until she stood eye to eye with Whitford at the gate. "My father ordered theft, fraud, and murder," she said. "And your clients want retirement for him." Whitford spread his hands. "They want stability." Ruth's voice went quiet in a way that made every person in the yard listen harder. "Tom Sutter is dead. James Polk is dead. Margaret Kane worked herself into an early grave holding together land your clients stole by paper and force. I will not trade justice for tidy books." Whitford's expression cooled. "You would destroy the company." "The company was built on stolen ground," Ruth said. "Let it fall." He tried once more. "Think carefully. This could take years." Ruth did not blink. "I survived 7 months being sold camp to camp. I can survive years in court." Whitford looked at Silas as if hoping for a weaker answer. Silas rested a hand on the blackened barn beam beside him. "You heard her." Whitford mounted and left with no deal. When the dust from his horse settled, the yard stayed quiet a few seconds longer. Then Eleanor Bryce adjusted her rifle and said, "Good. I did not ride all this way for half justice." That broke the tension. Holt barked a laugh. Carl Jessup went back to measuring posts. Someone handed Silas a hammer. Someone else started stacking salvage wood. Work resumed. That was how it happened after that. Courtrooms and rebuilding, telegraphs and fence posts, statements filed by day, rafters raised by evening. Neighbors kept coming. Some to testify, some to help, most to do both. The federal inquiry widened. Survey records were pulled. Water claims reviewed. Old foreclosures reopened. Men who once swore loyalty to Mercer started sending letters to Judge Creighton trying to save themselves. Wade Pruitt was removed from the territory before winter. Gerald Haynes was charged. 2 clerks turned witness. 3 judges resigned before they could be questioned. And Harlan Mercer, for all his money and all his polished words, finally stood in a courtroom where no one moved when he spoke. Silas was there the day the first judgment came down. Restitution of stolen land. Fraud findings entered into federal record. Criminal indictment approved. The room did not cheer. It was too heavy for cheering, too many graves behind it. But when the judge finished reading, Ruth closed her eyes and let out a breath like she had been holding it for years. Outside the courthouse, she stood on the steps in winter light, coat buttoned tight, hair pinned up neat, and looked smaller than she had in the witness chair. Not weaker. Just human. Silas stood beside her, hat in hand. "It's done," he said. She shook her head. "It started. There is still more." He smiled a little. "There she is." Ruth looked at him then, really looked, and the hardness in her face eased. "Your south pasture gets reviewed next month," she said. "Water rights, too. My mother should be here for that." Ruth's eyes softened. "She is. In the records. In your notes. In every page she kept." Silas swallowed hard and looked out over the street. He had spent years angry at his father for losing land. Now he knew better. His father had been hunted. His mother had fought alone. The shame he carried was never theirs to wear. Ruth touched his hand, gloved fingers warm against cold skin. "We bring it home," she said. "All of it. The land, the water, the truth." He turned his hand and held hers. When spring came, they rode back to the ranch for good. The barn was still half rebuilt. The corral needed work. The house leaned a little more than before. But the title papers were clean now, and more were coming. The South Pasture Review was in motion. Mercer's fees were frozen. The East Creek diversion was canceled. Ruth stood in the yard the first morning back and looked across the fields like she was measuring not what was there, but what could be. "Fence line first," she said. "Then barn roof. Then we rotate grazing on the north lot and let the lower grass recover." Silas laughed. "Good morning to you, too." She looked at him, one corner of her mouth lifting. "I have plans." "I know you do. Detailed plans. Lord, help me." Quote. This time she smiled fully, open and bright, and it changed the whole yard. Later that afternoon, Holt rode over with lumber. Carl Jessup came with his boys. Eleanor Bryce came with nails and opinions. Ida Polk arrived 2 days after with a sack of seed and a shotgun across her saddle, said nothing about sentiment, and stayed 3 nights helping Ruth sort ledgers into proper boxes. No one asked Ruth to leave. No one called her a burden. No one looked through her. At sundown, after the others rode home, Silas and Ruth sat on the porch steps with coffee in tin cups and watched the sky go gold over the pasture. The new bays grazed near the fence she had fixed on her first morning there. Silas stared at them a while, then said, "I keep thinking about that auction." Ruth was quiet. "I went for horses," he said. "Spent my last $15. Thought I was buying a way to save the ranch." Ruth looked down at her cup. "You bought trouble." He smiled. "I did." A soft wind moved across the yard. Then he turned toward her, serious now. "When I said I wasn't sending you anywhere, I meant for that night. Maybe a few days. I did not know what was coming." He paused. "I know now." Ruth held his gaze, waiting. "This place is yours too," he said. "Not because of what you did for me. Not because of the case. Because when you are here, it feels like the house is facing the right direction again." Ruth's eyes filled, but she did not look away. "My whole life," she said softly, "men decided where I belonged. My father, his men, traders, buyers." She took a breath. "You were the first one who asked me what I wanted." Silas set his cup down. "What do you want, Ruth?" She looked out at the barn frame, the repaired fence, the fields beginning to green, the land she had helped save, and the life neither of them expected. Then she looked back at him. "I want to stay," she said. I want to build something honest. I want to stop running when I hear hooves." A small smile touched her mouth. "And I want a proper desk for the ledgers because your system is a crime." Silas laughed so hard his ribs hurt. "Done," he said. Then, gentler, "all of it." She leaned her shoulder against his. He rested his hand over hers. No grand speech, no rush, no need. Just two people who had been bent by the same machine and somehow came out standing. In the weeks that followed, word of the Mercer case spread across the territory. People came with papers, with stories, with old notes and quiet grief, and names they had been afraid to say out loud. Judge Creighton kept filing. Land shifted back. Titles were corrected. Fees erased. The work was slow, but it moved. And at the Kane Ranch, every board they raised felt like part of the same thing. One evening, as the last light fell and hammer sounds faded, Eleanor Bryce stood in the yard and looked at Ruth and Silas side by side. "Funny thing," she said. "They threw her in free with 2 horses and thought she was worthless." Holt snorted. "Most expensive mistake Mercer ever made." Ruth smiled, but Silas shook his head. "No," he said, looking at Ruth. "Best thing that ever happened to this ranch." Ruth turned to him, surprise and warmth crossing her face all at once. Then she squeezed his hand once, firm and certain, the way she had from the start. The wind moved through the pasture, softer now, carrying fresh-cut wood, horse sweat, and spring soil. Home smells, Silas thought, not the kind bought with money. The kind built with truth, work, and one stubborn decision, made in a dirty auction yard when everyone else was laughing. Untie her. He had spoken the words because it was the only decent thing to do. He did not know then that those 2 words would bring him a partner, a future, and the truth his family had needed for years. But standing there in the evening light with Ruth beside him and his land finally coming back under honest sky, Silas knew this much for certain. Some choices cost everything. The right ones save
If you
it.
enjoyed the story, please like, share, and comment. Thanks for watching.